Hey guys, how's everyone doing? We got a whole bunch of questions and I'm excited to answer all of them. So let's go ahead and get started here. Let's see. So the first question is going to be from Dylan. Dylan, how's it going, brother? Let's see. The question Dylan asked is, I've decided to completely shift our revenue model for summer camp coming up the final week of July. Most of the school district that I'm partnered with is considered underserved, low income, single income household, and that's 33,000 homes in the area. We shifted to a more progressive model of crowdfunding, essentially by way of sponsorship of local businesses. I partnered with my local chamber of commerce and have a list of 6,400 local businesses that I'm reaching out to and asking for help and sponsorship of at least one child or student for the camp. Which is equal to $250 per child. I've created an email script to send, and I'm calling also. But I have actually started to consider hiring a salesperson to do the calling for me for a few weeks. If not up to until when we stop taking admissions. Are these the best ways of going about it? I think a salesperson is a great idea to free up my time, but I also want to be fiscally responsible due to current revenue and etc. Okay, so so here's my opinion. This is a brand new revenue model. It's untested. You haven't done this before. So my question to you is, do you really want someone that's absolutely brand new testing something for you, or actually approaching this and it's this new thing? I mean, after all, they're representing your company, so you want to make sure that, I mean, in my opinion, if I'm going after a new revenue model, it's usually me or some of my most senior people that's going to go after this. Because what we want to understand, what we want to do is that we want to make sure that when you're going there, because it's untested and we don't know what's going on, you have to be able to pivot quickly. And not only pivot quickly, make sure that you're getting the feedback or any kind of data that's that is going to have you pivot later on. So in my personal opinion, I wouldn't just bring on a new salesperson to kind of spearhead, I guess, a brand new revenue model. Secondary is that you got to think that, from the timeline perspective, you're going into this new revenue model. I think the final week is when your class is starting. So do you have enough time to, one, search, locate, assess, interview, onboard a salesperson? And then, do you have enough time to train them up to where you feel confident? Understand that if you bring on any kind of new staff, it doesn't matter if it's sales or admin or whatever it is, there's a hand-holding process that has to be required, even if they have experience, because it's a new company. So there's actually more work involved at the beginning before they can run on their own. So those are the kinds of things that you would have to consider. Again, I mean, if you're going to ask me point blank, I don't know. I only know the situation based on your question here, is that I would spearhead it myself, because the truth is, if it works, fantastic. If it doesn't, then if it completely flops, then you're not then you know firsthand, rather than having someone that is getting paid hourly, that knows their position is going to be temporary. I mean, how much do they care anyway if it's going to be like, hey, 2 weeks and you're gone? I mean, they're not going to put any effort into it. So that's my 2 cents on that. Hopefully that helped you out, Dylan. Okay. Lalona asks, hello, when stepping into a new leadership role, what are the strategies to build trust relationship with your team? Especially if you're moving up in an administrator role with the same people you work with for years. For example, I've been a teacher coach role, now I'm their principal, I'm their boss. I want to transition to be effective for both me and my team. Thank you very much. I can't tell you how many times in my actual corporate career this has happened, where I've been promoted and I've been either an individual contributor or manager, and then a manager to a director. It's kind of tricky, right? Because those transitions are sensitive, because you guys are all peers at one particular time, right? And then all of a sudden you're elevated now, and then you got to take in consideration, was anyone else in that peer group considered for your role, right? So those are all kind of different sensitive topics when you elevate the role. But it happens all the time. And the approach that you need to take on this is one, take it sensitively, right? And then also keep in mind the relationships that you had with those peer groups prior to you getting promoted, right? Some of those relationships that you had with your peers, some relationships were really good, and sometimes there's cases where sometimes they're not so good, right? So prior to elevating into a new role, the not so good relationships, it really didn't matter because you guys were working together. No one was mitigating or administering any duties. Now you're above that person and you have to administer the duties. So you got to first take inventory of that, right? And make sure that, okay, who are the people that I've really built a relationship, and was there any actual strain on other peers that I'm now their supervisor? So those are the things that you need to kind of take into account. Now, the first thing I would do when you move into a role like this is first, don't start establishing any kind of authoritative role. You want to stay as collaborative as possible, right? So when you're administering duties, you want to make sure that you're getting their feedback and not just getting their feedback and hearing their feedback, but letting them know that it's being taken into account, right? Because when you step into a new role, you don't want to take an authoritative role or a dominant role right off the bat. There's kind of a gentle transition when you're doing that. So again, when you do that, you want to still be as collaborative as possible. You want to make sure that the relationship that you have with them when you guys were peers was as similar as possible. But knowing that you have to distance yourself because you have to take that authoritative role. Now, what does that mean? Because usually in companies, when you're peer-to-peer, you can go over to the water cooler and have those, conversations that peers have, right? But as a supervisor, you can't do that anymore. So that's what I mean by distancing that. When they say problems always roll uphill, you have to push those problems uphill, and you cannot have that same level of casualness. So the trick on the transition is, how do you stay? How do you continue the trust that you have with that peer group, but then establish authority at the same time? So that's how I did it. That's how I suggest a lot of my clients to do it, and it tends to work out. The one thing that I can't iterate this enough. The one thing that you want to make sure that you do is don't fracture the trust, right? And sometimes being too abrasive or changing too much, right? Like companies spend millions and millions of dollars on change management, right? You put a new corporate structure in there. You put a new management structure in there. You go through an acquisition. You put new software in there. People are completely resistant to change, right? And the only way that you can get people to change is, one, address the change, right? You don't want to cover up the change. Address the change. Make sure they're comfortable with the change by addressing their fears, their concerns, and then making sure that they're heard, and then you don't lose their trust. So I know I kind of went a little bit longer on that, but that's what I do. So hopefully that helps you out there. Next question is Deanna. She says, I'm a licensed esthetician laser specialist, and I have 5 others working for me in my clinic, including a clinic manager. I want to stop working so much on my patients and start working on things that grow the business. Okay, that's great. I need to delegate as much as I can to my clinic manager. I'm looking at ideas on how I can put together a list of all those things, and I want her to do, and to make sure that she can report back to me on a daily or weekly basis. How do I put a list of things? How do I put together a list of things you want someone like that to handle for you, and how do you keep it up to date? Do you use software, meetings, emails? I'm open to any ideas. All right. First of all, I think you need to kind of figure out exactly what tasks that you want to delegate to your clinic manager, right? So, what's the list of tasks that you want to delegate? I think that there's some tasks that you might want to keep a little closer to your chest, right? So anything that might have financial data, I don't know. It depends on your company or how your structure is. But you want to figure out, okay, what is the list of things that I want to delegate off my plate to them. Now, when you delegate that, every single task that you have delegated, you need to come up with a process. So like if you want to delegate, you know, the reconciliation of your I don't know, accounts payable or whatever it is, you need to, one, that's the task, and then also have a process of how that task needs to be done, right? Because if you don't give them a process, then they're going to fumble around trying to figure out what it is. So again, list the task, then make sure you have a process for each task, right? And then from each task in the process, you also want to make sure that you understand what makes their task completion successful or not, right? You know, just because you delegate a task doesn't mean they're going to be successful at it. So those three things are really important. Understand what tasks that you want to delegate, make sure you have a process, and then make sure that you can gauge their level of success on those particular on that particular task, right? So the next question was the meetings. Okay, it's up to you. I mean, if you want it weekly or if you want it daily, you can do it either. If you do it daily, I would suggest you keep it as short as possible. Keep it at the same times, either in the morning or in the afternoon at the end of the day. You don't want to smack it midday because that throws off the pattern. I tend to like to do it at the end of the day, and the reason why is because they've kind of gone through everything already and they're going to give you a debrief of the day. So, but it's up to you. Some people do it in the morning, some people do it at the tail end, but you want to use those bookends and you want to keep it at that time every single day. Don't change up the time, so that way they can get into a rhythm of it. So and it shouldn't be long, right? You know, when I first started my business, we had something called a daily stand-up, right? And we got it from something called a Scrum methodology that they use in software development. Basically, everyone's working on a different project, and if you have five, or actually, you know, you're just talking to your clinic managers. But for everybody, I'll just give you an example. If you want to have a daily check-in, basically, it needs to be really, really short. How we used to do it is there would be like 10 of us. Everyone stands up, goes round robin, and gives up. This is what happened. This is what happened yesterday. This is what I'm doing today. Here's my problems. Here's what's going on, and we just knock it out as soon as possible. You don't want to get into a conversation where it's really long and drawn out. So when you're just trying to get daily updates on progress of goals, just be really short about it and let them get back to work. I don't use a particular software. I write down a list, and then I either write down a list or email list, or you can build an Excel spreadsheet or whatever. You know, it's nothing too complicated or convoluted. You know, and you know, you might want to change it up like from week to week or month to month basis, depending on like what else you want to delegate. So I make it pretty fluid. So I just use a piece of paper or like an email. Next question is by Law Jackson. He says, hello again, mentors. I've been making sales calls and it's been interesting. A year ago, I would have fought with everything I had not to do these sales calls. I'm at a point now and I have a few questions. A lot of people are screening their calls through voicemail. Should I leave a voicemail? Do I read my script or just leave my contact information? Let's see, emailing my leads. I have emails and phone numbers. Should I reach out via email and invite them to an introductory meeting? Number 3, best contact. Should I target directors and content people, or should I always try to talk to the CEO? I asked because large companies have guys or gals near the tip top are really short. So I guess what you're saying is that there's not a lot of them. Today was the second day of my calls. A couple times I legitimately was scared to call certain businesses, but I made 2 appointments. Awesome, good for you. That's awesome. Right as I was bracing myself, nonstop rejection, we got a couple of yeses. Yeah, so that's I just kind of want to point that out. There's nothing that builds momentum than actual, like, you know, these yeses. So it keeps you going. So awesome. Felt so good. On a personal note, I've been questioned about bringing in a sales coach. Family members are getting in my face trying to talk me off the ledge. It's a little frustrating, but very discouraging. I've heard people say, that they told you that you can't do it. It's like a punch in the gut for someone to tell me in the face. I can always use some encouragement, you all. Okay, so first of all, don't listen to those family that tells you you can't do it. You can do it, right? And not only you can, you will do it, right? It's because those people that tell you you can't are generally the ones that aren't even doing anything for themselves. So don't even listen to those guys. So that's first and foremost. That's the most important thing. Don't get discouraged by that stuff. For your voicemail questions, yes, leave them a voicemail. Follow up with an email after that. Tell them that with the email, I left you a voicemail. I'm sending you an email. I even follow up with texts, right? I think texts are very important now because people are always texting. I don't think people don't get on the phone anymore and actually talk to people. I send a text. So basically, I'll leave a voicemail. I'll send an email and say, hey, I just want to let you know I also left you a message on your phone, and I'm going to go ahead and send you a text. So then you have 3 different points of contacts, right? And then if you don't get a hold of them, this is a whole numbers game, right? The more people that you're going to get, I mean, it's a contact sport. So the more people that you're going to get in contact with, the greater the odds are going to be, right? The more persistent and the more contacts that you have with people, the more close ratio that you're going to have. It's just how it works. The more people you get in contact, the higher your close, the more closes that you're going to have just by sheer volume. All right. So if you can't get in contact with them in those 3 ways, make sure that you get in contact with them a couple days later. A couple days later, hey, I just wanted to follow up with you, wanted to see if you got my voicemail, wanted to see if you got my text, wanted to see if you got my email, right? You don't want to stop. And then a couple days later, hey, don't mean to like bother you, but I just wanted to make sure that you got my email, you got my voicemail, And then eventually they're going to say, hey, no, I don't want to, or hey, what do you got, right? If they say no, then you say, it's okay, fantastic. I'm going to follow up with you in a couple, what I'll do is I'll keep you in my file. I'll follow up with you in a couple months. And then you keep that funnel going all the time. Here's what I would do for those guys that say, okay, no right now, and I'll follow up later. You said you had their email contacts and you said you had their phone contacts, or what I would do is get a email marketing program. It's really cheap. It's either get Constant Contact or MailChimp, right? Put their information on there and send them informational mailers on what you guys do, right? I'm sure everybody gets those like email mailers like, hey, there's a new restaurant here, and it's like constantly coming up, and then you either unsubscribe or you just delete it. But what the thing is, you're constantly getting it in their eyeballs, right? So send out mailers, send out informational information on what your products is. That way, they're constantly seeing it on like a bi-weekly or a monthly basis. So when you do call, they say, oh yeah, I remember, I saw that email, right? So you want to hit them as much as you can. The next question you asked was about, should I say a script? I wouldn't say the full script on a voicemail. I mean, I'll just hang up on that stuff. I would tell them a brief summary on the reason why you're calling, and then I would leave your contact information. Okay. And then you were asking about who in the company should you contact. I would reach out to, anybody that can possibly be a decision maker. The higher you go, what happens is if you're reaching out to the CEO, I'm always reaching out to CEOs, but what usually happens is they point me in the direction of the person that's supposed to make that decision, right? So if I'm reaching out to the CEO, they say, okay, why don't you contact the chief human, this is generally what happens. I'm not in the day-to-day. I'm not in that. I don't handle that operationally. Why don't you contact such and such? She is the chief human resource officer. What I do from that particular point is I contact them and I say, hey, your CEO told me to contact you. Please give me a call. It's kind of like a little maze. You just contact as many people as you can that you think are decision makers, and one of those people are going to point you in the right direction. Okay, wait a minute. Was this the same? Okay, I think. Okay, Deanna asked, is this your second question? One sec. Okay, yeah, this is a second question. Deanna asked another question, and she says, I'm interviewing new candidates for a licensed esthetician. My question is, what are the best questions to ask when I conduct an interview? So this would be an incredibly long answer, so I'm going to summarize that for you. First and foremost, you want to make sure, let's divide those in two things, right? You have tangible skill sets, and then you have the intangible skill sets. The tangible skill sets are, do they have the skills to actually perform the job? Do they have their licenses? I'm not an esthetician, so I'm going to guess, right? So do they have their license? Is the license valid? What's their client load? How many facials are they doing? Do they do women? Do they do men? Do they do chemical peels? You want to get those hard skills. Like, do they actually have the skills to do the job, right? So you want to ask as many questions as you possibly can to make sure that they actually have the skills to do the job and everything and all the services that you have to offer at your job. The second thing is the intangible skill set. So this is like personality, thought process, and things like that. What I want you to do is I want you to go on Google and search behavioral-based interviews, right? These are situational questions that you give your candidate or you give your interviewee, and it shows you the process on how to continuously ask these questions. The reason why we have to ask these behavioral-based questions is because we want to understand how they think, right? And generally, it's just one or two or maybe three questions, because the questioning process on each question is kind of extensive, right? I'll just give you a really quick question. You're going to ask them a situational question like, okay, you had a disagreement with your supervisor. Tell me about that disagreement and what was the resolutions and what were the steps that you had to take to resolve that issue, right? And then they start answering. What happens if they can't answer that with depth? Then they're probably not telling the truth, or they haven't really been in that situation, or they didn't do anything about it. So the premise is you constantly ask kind of the same questions. Okay, so you talk to your manager. Tell me a little bit about what you and your manager discussed. Okay, so your manager felt that way. So what did you do about that particular situation? And then how did you go about that conversation with the manager? So it's basically kind of just constantly investigating downward and downward and downward to get as much detail as possible. And you'll understand is that, everybody can answer surface questions, right? But they can't answer really deep ones. And also, when you ask that level of detail on one question, then you'll understand what their process is, right? Like what their thought process is. How do they handle conflict? How do they handle a customer? How do they handle, supporting a CEO? How do they handle, multitasking? You can really kind of get deep. So again, make sure that you got those two things. You want the tangible skill set, so ask them all the pertinent questions that they need to actually do the job. And then those intangibles, go to Google, search behavioral-based interviews. Okay. Heather asked, when conducting an interview, is there a certain number of questions you should ask? I don't want to ask too many drawn out or process, but I want to make sure I get all the information I need. Very similar to the last question I answered. Again, make sure that you ask the tangible skill set questions, meaning that, again, ask the questions that need to be asked to see if they can actually do the job, right? So your company is a mobile grooming company. You want to ask, everything that needs to be. Have you groomed a dog before? Have you used clippers? What do you do with a large dog? What do you do with a small dog? What do you do with a dog with hair versus fur? All those kinds of questions, right? So those are actual skill sets. Again, the second thing is go to Google, research behavioral-based interview, and then it will kind of give you how to ask those questions. What I do want to point out too for both those questions is that, and especially yours because you're asking like how many questions. An interview shouldn't be a question and answer session, right? It shouldn't be like, yes or no. It shouldn't be something like a question. It has to be very conversational, right? So the faster you can get them into conversation, the faster you can get them into talking, and the faster you can get them to trust you in this conversation, right? So that's the beauty of an interviewer, is how do you get them to trust you off the bat, right? Because a lot of times they get into an interview and they already have a wall up, right? Because they're scared. They want to get the job. They don't, they're trying their best. The fastest way you can disarm them, get into relationship with them, tell them, hey, how you doing? How's it going? Is there anything that you need? The faster you can befriend them, the faster you can get that guard down. Then you can get them into conversation. Again, an interview should not be a question and answer series, right? It shouldn't have a lot of questions. It should have the minimal amount of questions to get the maximum amount of information that you need. Because the interview needs to be very conversational, because that way you get them talking, then you can get to understand who they really are, right? So if you're asking too many questions and they're saying yes, no, kind of, yeah, I did it, you're not getting to know them at all. So make sure that interview is very conversational, and make sure that you build rapport with them, so that disarms them when you're getting into an interview with them. Okay. This is Helena. Hi there, I would like to learn about growing a large fan base on Instagram, but I do not know how to work algorithms. I would like to know whether I should wait to establish to start branding, or whether I should start from the beginning. Okay, so first of all, I'm not an expert on growing a social media platform, Instagram platform. I'm not an expert on getting fans like that. I tend not to answer questions that I don't know anything about. I mean, if I gave you some kind of advice, it would be anecdotal and something from my head. So I'm not going to do that. However, the one thing that stood out was the branding standpoint. I think before you take, and again, I think before you take any approach to marketing, I think you should realize what your brand is, right? Because you want to make sure that brand messaging is congruent across all the different kind of marketing platforms, right? So like your website, your website, if you're doing email marketing, if you're doing traditional marketing, if you're doing print marketing, or whatever avenue that you're using, you want to make sure that's congruent. So if you don't have your branding in place and it's disjointed, like if they go on your website, it looks completely different than your social media marketing. I mean, just from a consumer standpoint, I'm not going to like that. Like, it just seems disjointed. So I think branding needs to be it needs to be congruent across the board, regardless of what arm or what avenue you're using for that marketing. So I think branding is very important from the beginning, and making sure your brand reflects across, and also make sure that not only it reflects your corporate brand, but also reflects your mission, right? In recruitment, we want to make sure that's very important, to make sure that our branding is congruent with the actual corporation, because if it's disjointed, it doesn't flow well, and candidates understand that. Typically in recruitment, you have these large companies like Automatic Data Processing, where they have their corporate website, but they have some third-party add-on attachment for their career website, and it looks completely disjointed. It's like you click the careers page and it doesn't look like the website at all, and that from a user experience standpoint doesn't flow. It doesn't feel good. So you want to make sure, again, I mean, again, I'm not a social media guy. That I just know from a branding standpoint, everything kind of has to stay congruent across the line, even your email signature, right? So that's my 2 cents on that. Let's see. Oh, okay, this is the last question. Is it the last question? Yeah, that's one more question. I like to have my employees set goals. Oh, this is from Heather. I like to have my employees set goals, either personal or professional, and reassess whether they are at each. Wait, let me read that again. I like to have my employees set goals, either personal or professional, and reassess where they are at each quarterly review. What are your thoughts on creating regularly scheduled meetings and documents and sharing them and creating a system for the company? Yeah, no, I love it. I think when you're setting goals, I think you do need to have documentation, right? I think I mentioned in my previous answer about, what was it? It was about delegation, right? You're delegating roles. I think this is very similar. What I mentioned about delegating roles is that one, you have to understand what you're trying to delegate. So again, what you got to understand the goal that you're trying to set, right? Second thing about that goal is, so if you want to have a quarterly, what does their quarterly goal look like, right? So that needs to be addressed, that needs to be outlined, that needs to be documented somewhere, that needs to be somewhere where they're constantly seeing it so they're held accountable. Next thing is their milestones, right? Since it's quarterly, what are your milestones? Like, let's just say you're in a sales company. How many, a lot of sales company track talk time. How many dials are you going to have per day? How many contacts are you going to have per week? How many submittals? Or, those are milestones, right? It's basically the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, the steps to getting to your goal. So what I would do is, one, the quarterly goal, establish that quarterly goal, set the milestones in there to make sure that when you are having that daily, weekly conversation or whatever cadence that you're having those meetings with them, that you can their talking point is what milestone are they at, right? And then the last one is very similar to the delegation. You want to make sure what the level, is it successful when they complete that goal, and what I mean by that is, like, is the process or those milestones, are they supporting the completion of the goal, right? And then you're asking, you did ask this, but I just mentioned it. If you're going to have, you said that you're going to have quarterly reviews. That's great, but I think you should be touching base with them like on a weekly basis at the minimum. Again, what I would not suggest is that you set up a quarterly goal and you just set them out to pasture. They're just going to run around. You set up a goal, and then you want to make sure that you're clocking in their milestones, right? So they're hitting every step that they need to hit to give them the better opportunity to hit that goal, right? You can kind of think about this, right? Like, when we're all in high school and we have a final exam, when do we study for our final exam? If you're anything like me, I was studying for the final exam the night before, and I did terrible. If I set up milestones, and this is the chapters I need to read, this is a chapter I need to read, if you set that up, the likelihood of them achieving their goal is much higher, right? And it breaks down the goal so it's not overwhelming. So I would have those meetings on a weekly basis. Again, it doesn't have to be long. It could be pretty short, but I would keep it at the same time frame, at the same day every week, right? Again, if you're going to set goals and you want to make sure that you have check-in meetings, do it at the same time, either in the morning or or later in the day, at the same day every week, so the habit builds. Okay. Well, guys, that's it. That's all of them. Yeah. I hope that provided you some value. I hope you took some good nuggets out of that. Yeah. Look forward to answering your questions next month. So throw them at me. Guys, have a wonderful month. Have a wonderful day. I look forward to seeing you guys soon. Bye.